In the ocean's vast and rolling domain, amidst the waves where seagulls remain, a noble band of sailors brave and true, they're the pilots of the Maritime Blue. With steady hand and knowing eye, they guide the ships as they sail on by. Through treacherous waters they safely steer, a beacon of hope when storms draw near. From dawn's first light till twilight's fall, they answer the ocean's beck and call, guiding vessels of all shapes and size through channels deep and shallow skies. Their expertise a legacy they share, passed down through ages with utmost care. Navigating tides and currents dance, they bring ships home with a skillful glance. Through fog and mist, their senses keen, they read the signs that lie unseen. And with a heart that's brave and bold, they help the ships through waters cold. O maritime pilots, guardians of the sea, your courage and wisdom set us free. You are the stars that guide us right through darkest hours and stormy night. So let us praise these souls so bright who keep our ships on course each night. Across the oceans far and wide, we raise a toast to those who guide. That is an anonymous poem written for maritime pilots. The history of maritime pilots dates back at least to ancient Greece and Rome. In those times, ship's captains would hire local harbor captains, often local fishermen, to bring their vessels safely into port. The pilots would help the crew guide the vessel safely into and out of ports or other dangerous navigational areas. The pilot boat was made to quickly reach incoming ships from port. Eventually, local harbors hired licensed pilots for their specific areas. Marine pilotage is one of the oldest professions in the world, with references to pilots found in some of the earliest recorded history. In Europe, a pilot was originally known as a loadsman, derived from the German word for lodestone, an early compass. Today, pilots all over the world use their expert knowledge and skills to guide ships of all sizes into and out of ports, as a crucial cog in the cargo, passenger, and cruise line industries. Maritime pilot Captain Carolyn Kurtz, today on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. I'm very pleased to have today Captain Carolyn Kurtz. She is a maritime pilot here in the Tampa Bay area, and I'm so happy that she was able to join me today. Welcome, Carolyn.
Hi, Rich.
Let's start from the beginning with your background. How did you start your journey into this maritime business?
Well, it was actually kind of unusual. It's probably not the path that most people take. So when I was a child, my father was working for a big shipping company. And in the summers, my mother and sister and I would get shipped off on cargo ships to just get out of New York City for the summer and see some of the world. My mother is from Scotland. So once or twice we ended up on cargo ships that were going to Scotland. And that's how we got over there to visit her parents and other family. And so we started doing the ship thing when I was about 4 years old and did that every summer, probably until I was 10 or 11. And, you know, the foundation had been set. It was even all through high school when I was trying to figure out where to go to college and what I wanted to do with my life. The one thing I kept coming back to that had really held my interest over all those years was my time on ships. And, so it was exposure at a very early age. And when I was a kid and we'd be driving over a bridge in New York, Manhattan's an island, we lived in Queens. So you're always going over a bridge. There's always water. And anytime I would see a tugboat, I would make my parents pull the car over so I could look at the tugboat. So, it's just kind of always been a thing for me. And then just as I got to be in high school and was figuring out where to go to college, the maritime schools, I became aware of all of that and just went from there.
And you were appointed to go to the Merchant Marine Academy. Is that right?
That's right. It's a federal service academy, just like West Point and Annapolis and the others, Air Force, et cetera, Coast Guard. And a lot of people don't even know about the Merchant Marine Academy. They just think the service academies are Army, Navy, and Air Force. But really, the Coast Guard and the Merchant Marine do have federal service academies. And yes, you need an appointment from your congressperson or senator. So you have to apply when you're in high school, usually the end of your junior year, or maybe even early in your senior year for those interviews and hopefully the endorsement.
When you finished at the Merchant Marine Academy, what was your first appointment?
Well, it's commercial shipping. So you don't get appointed. You actually apply for jobs and get jobs the way you would in any other field. And I had been a cadet with a company and they hired me. So I was hired as a third mate or a third officer. And I was lucky to be assigned to a ship that was the sister ship of something I had spent my cadet time on. So it was very familiar already, which was a huge advantage. It was quite a large tanker, a crude oil tanker that was 894 feet long. And it's a big ship. It was, but it was already kind of familiar. So I just, went on board and did my thing. But I felt like that was a huge advantage having, been on that. But that was my first assignment. I did about 3 or 4 months on there.
So you graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy, but what other certifications do you require in order to become a pilot?
That's a really interesting question. There are many, many different paths to pilotage in the United States, and they vary from being fresh out of college and having no maritime experience whatsoever and just applying to one of the organizations where that is how they do it. They don't want you with preconceived notions or other experience that they have to undo. So that's at one end of the spectrum. So really very inexperienced, but college graduate, and not necessarily even maritime graduate, just someone who has, has received a college education, and then they train you from really the bottom up as far as being a deckhand on the pilot boat and then working on the pilot boat. And it takes years to even get to the point where you're an apprentice on a ship. So it's really a much longer term kind of training, but they take you right away. Now, the other extreme are places where you have a rigorous competitive exam, and the qualifications, the highest qualification for one of those places is to already be an unlimited master of oceans. So the biggest Coast Guard license you can get as a mariner, and sometime as master. And then they put you through a written test and a simulator test and an interview. So those are really the two ends of the spectrum, this, full experienced mariner, and then this very extensive testing process, all the way to, okay, I'm out of college and I want to be a pilot, and then everything in between. There are so many variables there.
You actually served in the Persian Gulf during the Iraq and Iran war. What was your role during that time?
That was in 87, 88, around that time frame. And I was the third mate on a ship. Was I third mate? No, actually, I was second officer by then on the ship. So
Okay.
It must have been 1988. And it was a ship it wasn't part of MSC, which is Military Sea Lift Command, that is sort of the merchant branch of the Navy, where the ships are painted gray. They look like Navy ships, but they're staffed by merchant mariners. It wasn't that. We were a completely commercial enterprise chartered to the Navy. So it's kind of a subtle difference, but
Okay.
for the people that are in the industry, they understand the difference. So I was just a second mate on a ship that happened to be operating in Diego Garcia, which is a strategic reserve ship place. There's Navy installation there. We rent it from the British. It's the British Indian Ocean territories, and it's right in the middle. It's a speck, a teeny tiny speck in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And there are any number of reserve ships there filled with all sorts of things ready to deploy at a moment's notice to help our forces, to act as support forces, to the Navy anywhere in the world, in that region. So I joined a ship in Kuwait, and because the ship I was joining was up there, and it was we were full of gas, diesel. It was a tanker, so all sorts of refined petroleum products. So that's what I did. It was anything I would do as a second mate on any ship, but we just happened to be in a war zone, and so that there were other layers of experience. My duties weren't any different, but when we were underway, we had Navy escorts, helicopters, ships, naval officers on board acting as liaison, all of that. So there were some tense hours when we were transiting through particular areas of the Persian Gulf. But then we would go back to Diego Garcia and wait until they needed us again. And so it was like that.
You said that so casually. Well, I was just doing my job. It just happened to be a war zone.
Well, it was. Maybe I just didn't know enough then to think that much about it. So, sometimes we'd hear crazy things on the radio. The American ships were very well escorted and protected, but there were certain vessels of other nations that perhaps did not have those relationships, and so were experiencing a lot more of being in the war zone. So we would hear things on the radio, ships calling for help because there was a gunboat off the bow and they thought they were going to get struck or something. So you did. I don't mean to make light of it. It was a very serious situation, but we were so well protected and cared for by the Navy when we were there, because we were on a tanker that could blow up if it got hit. So actually, one quick funny little story. I had just gotten relieved off of watch and we were under escort. So I forget what time it was, 8 to 12 maybe. And so I went down to the dining room to have lunch, and I got down there and I could feel the ship shaking. And that happens when you go from going full ahead to trying to stop the ship. So you put the engines astern, the ship starts to shake. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I go running back up to the bridge, and one of the escorts thought that we were about to go sailing over mines in the water, and because they'd seen something from the air that they looked like mines, and it turned out that they were sea turtles. Oh. And so, yeah, because they were kind of the same size and shape as the mines. So that was a false alarm, and we were all able to laugh about that instead of something else. So
tense moment, but just turtles.
Just turtles, those darn turtles.
Now, for those of my listeners that may not know, could you explain exactly what the job of a maritime pilot is?
So a maritime pilot is someone that doesn't go to sea with the ship. The maritime pilot is specific to the port area where they work. So ship captains cannot possibly be expected to have all the channels memorized in every port that they might go to. And because ships are transiting in narrow channels when they get to port areas, and it is not like big deep water navigation, it's narrow, restricted waterway navigation, pilots train in that way so that you have this local expert, someone that knows the tides and the currents and where all the bumps are on the bottom, and the customary practices of the port, how you talk on the radio, is there a dredge working over here, how to use tugboats for docking and undocking, all of those different things. So your pilot is an expert in the restricted waterway movement of large vessels. So also the waterway needs protecting from vessels that might be in a substandard condition, or might go too fast, or not interact with other traffic correctly. So, your pilot is someone that is primarily looking out for the interests of the state, that we are charged by the state with the protection of the waterway and safe movement of vessels. So that is a little bit different than what the captain does.
Yeah, I have to imagine somebody that was just coming into a port that they've never been to. Some of them obviously are very difficult to navigate. The value of a pilot is tremendous. I can't imagine trying to navigate a channel that I've never been to. Maybe you have some charts and that's about it.
Yeah, that's true. And Tampa's a fairly challenging waterway. It's 42 miles from the sea buoy up to the main port. And so there's a lot of channel. It's narrow. We have two-way traffic most of the time. And most captains, when they come here for the first time, are really surprised when they see other ships coming and they realize that you're going to share the channel for a couple minutes until you're past and clear. So it's a bit of an eye opener.
Yeah. Something that I've been dying to ask you, and that is the process of getting from the escort boat onto the ship, climbing that ladder or whatever the mechanism is on certain ships. When I see videos of this, I'm just blown away because it looks so incredibly dangerous. Is it
It,
actually as dangerous as it looks?
it is the most dangerous part of the job, getting on and off ships. And in fact, pilots are hurt and die every year getting on and
Mhm.
off ships. So it's important that that equipment is maintained in excellent condition. And sadly, it isn't always. There are ladder failures and all things like that. But, just to explain briefly how that happens, you don't just pull up to a ship that's stopped. The ship is moving through the water, and then the pilot boat is moving through the water. So the pilot boat matches the speed of the ship, which is about 10 knots, and a knot is a nautical mile per hour. So it's a little bit longer than a land mile, but, pretty close. So about 10 to 12 knots, the ship is moving. The pilot boat comes in, matches the speed so that it appears relative to each other, you're not moving. Does that make sense? So
Mhm.
there's zero relative speed if you do it right, and you come up right next to it, and then you step across to the ladder. And so for listeners, it's a Jacob's ladder. So picture two long ropes with boards every foot or so, and you climb. That's the ladder. That's standard equipment that you use to get on and off ships. So no matter how modern or what sort of technology is out there, you still have to climb up and down a rope ladder basically to get on and off a ship. And that climb can be anywhere from a step across, so almost no climb, to 30 feet. So it really varies.
Why is it that new methods of getting onto the ship haven't been implemented? A side door, maybe half of that height up above the waterline, obviously, but some other mechanism to get onto the ship.
The method of getting on a board has so much to do with what kind of ship it is. So passenger vessels, for example, have that exactly. They have a door in the side, and they open up the door, and the boat pulls up, and it's usually a step or maybe one or two steps on the ladder, on the pilot ladder. But it's as long as the weather's good and you have everything matched, it's very easy to get on and off of ships in that way. On some of the really big container ships, you also go in through a side door. Most ships, though, the part of the ship that you're climbing up is cargo space. So if you had to have an access door on each side with a walkway and stairs and all those things, you'd be cutting into the cargo space of the ship. And ships are just cargo movers. The people part of it is really, it's so secondary. So the ladder, even though it's so simple, ropes and slats, there are no moving parts. There's very little that can break as far as that goes. Some ships used to have these pilot hoists, and it was almost like a little exterior elevator, and you get on board and they push a button, and there's a pulley and wires, and because ships are subject to salt water and air, those things would start failing and people would get hurt and all that. So those things were outlawed a really long time ago. So sometimes, simple is better. In bigger ports, pilots get on and off by helicopter, but it's enormously expensive and not really practical for our waterway.
Yeah. Yeah, that all makes sense, especially when you talk about the likelihood of failing of some kind of more complicated machine. And obviously the owner of the cargo ship wants to maximize how much cargo they have inside of the hull.
Yeah.
When you get aboard a ship, what's the interaction like between that ship's captain and crew?
So there are some standard things that you have to do. So a ship's officer or an unlicensed person meets you at the ladder on the deck and then walks you up to the wheelhouse in case you don't know how to get there. So the wheelhouse, navigation bridge, there's terms that you use interchangeably, and many of them are correct. And so that's the nerve center of the ship as far as navigation goes. So there's usually a captain, officer of the watch, and a helms person, someone who's physically got their hands on the wheels steering. And you have a brief conference with the captain before you take over. So the first thing I usually say, hello, captain, how are you? How's everything? Is everything working okay? And that's kind of their first opportunity to say either everything's fine or everything's fine except, this doesn't work or that doesn't work or whatever. And then there's actually a written exchange. There's what they call a pilot card. And so the ship provides certain information. There's a kind of a bird's eye view outline of a ship with certain distances that are important for me to know what kind of propulsion the ship has. Is it a single propeller, a double propeller? How fast the ship goes, how long it takes to stop, just all sorts of maneuvering characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to really go line by line before you take over. Generally, is everything working well enough for me to take over? That's the first thing. And then I ask what course they're steering and how fast they're going. What they have what they call bells. So let's say a ship can go 100 RPMs on full speed. So 30 RPMs might be what they call dead slow. And that's a low speed. It's the lowest speed the diesel engine can go. It's sort of a minimum RPM. So you get that air start, mm-hmm. and then the propeller's spinning. And so that might be 4 or 5 knots. And then slow ahead is a little bit more, and half ahead, and then you work your way up to full ahead. And that's all laid out on a table. And that becomes important when you're maneuvering, you start slowing down. And that way, you know how much power you get and sort of what to expect. So usually ships are on slower half to get the pilot boat alongside. And then you get up to the bridge, you go up to full ahead. And then the exchange with the helmsman, what course are you steering? And he says 084. I repeat 084. And then the pilot has the con, which means the pilot has control of the vessel. So, and so that's like your basic interaction. So I'm interacting with the helmsman constantly because I'm giving rudder commands, right 10, left 10, every mm-hmm. subtle little movement of the ship is given through commands. And then the captain, obviously I'm interacting with the captain all along the way. We go a little bit deeper, especially if there are deficiencies. If you had a failure in your last port, what was it? Are your anchors ready? The anchors have to be ready to drop. You have to have a lookout on the bow. So there's just like sort of a constant flow of information. I tell them what side the ship is going to go to the dock so they can prepare their ropes for mooring and their gangway. I tell them what time we're going to get tugboats. There are a lot of things, a lot of reporting, phone calls, arrangements that get made in the few hours. So there are other people on the bridge, and a lot of what you talk about is just the business of getting the ship from one place to another. But then there's also casual conversation. Over the years, I found captains are curious about why a woman is a pilot or how a woman got to be a pilot. They offer you lunch or dinner if it's mealtime, and you talk about the food and, oh, what was your last port? Where are you going next? What's your cargo? So sometimes there's chit chat. And then if it's a repeat customer, if it's someone that I know that I've been on their ship before, there's always a warm welcome. Hello, Captain Carolyn, how are you? And oh, how's your son? Or, how's your family? And so it's nice. It's nice when you have those repeat customers because the familiarity helps. Most mariners are on ships for a long time. So sometimes just those familiar things, it's nice.
What is your most challenging moment that you faced during your career?
That's a really hard question to answer.
Or at least the most memorable?
The first ship I handled on my own was really memorable in a good way. We train a lot for the job, but then your first solo is, you're dying to tell the captain it's your first solo, but you don't want to tell them either.
Right.
So, I kind of had that push pull in my head, and I didn't tell him. He wasn't a regular customer, so he was just, it was his first time in Tampa, and I was sailing the ship at night. And I went on board, I did my thing, I got off, and, that was like an amazing, just to get that first solo under your belt. Yeah. But honestly, there are challenges regularly. We get a new kind of ship, a bigger ship, a deeper ship. You get terrible weather. There are challenges all the time. So that's really a moving target. But yeah, just, getting fully licensed, soloing, moving up, becoming a good partner, and then being able to train the pilots behind me. It's there's a lot of satisfaction there. And challenges. It's hard to watch other people learn. And then when they really start getting the hang of it, that feels really good.
And I imagine every time you go out, as routine as it may seem, it's a totally different adventure every time, even if it's a ship you've been on before, because no conditions are ever going to be the same from one time to the next, whether it's weather or traffic or what have you.
Yeah, that's really true, Rich. I often say that ships are all the same and they're all different. So the principles of ship handling don't change, but everything else does. The time of day, if you're tired, if the crew is tired, if it's a nice day, if it's nighttime, raining, windy, hot, cold, did they give you lunch or now you're irritated because you're hungry and you missed lunch? All of those kinds of things. Is the coffee good? So yeah, there are just, dozens and dozens of variables.
What do you enjoy most about being a pilot?
It's incredibly satisfying on a day-to-day basis. You go to work and you move a ship, and if you didn't give all of those commands in that order, the ship wouldn't get where it's supposed to go. That just having that experience, the expertise, the confidence of the captain to not interfere with what I'm doing. But there are so many other entities that contribute to me being successful in the job. So having really good tugboats and really good people working on the tugboats, that makes docking and undocking look easy because those guys and gals are doing a terrific job. The office staff that's arranging, there's timing. It's this just incredible coordination of efforts that people are going to be where they're supposed to be when you need them. So the people handling the lines and the agent getting to the ship and your ride getting there after. And like, there's an incredible amount of coordination. Yeah. The pilot gets a lot of credit for doing that stuff, but there's a good team there too.
You pilot some of the biggest cargo ships that come in and out of this port in Tampa. When you're finished with that, when you bring that ship in and you look at it from afar and you see how big it is, you can say to yourself, I guided that ship. That humongous vessel, that was me.
Yeah.
Now, I know it takes a team, but
yeah.
Still, you were in charge.
Yeah, no, I still feel that way. I've been doing this for 28 years now, and the job doesn't get old. I'm not jaded about what I do. I love the job. I respect the job. And even if it's the smallest ship that comes in here, they still deserve the same attention to detail that you give on what you perceive as being the hardest or biggest ship that you're moving. Anything can happen on any size vessel at any time, and you have to be prepared that you can have a big accident on a little ship. So, that sort of, I just keep calling it respect. That's what it is, in my opinion. You can't just dismiss something. But you're right. Sometimes I'm climbing up a big ship, a really big ship, 1,000-foot long ship at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think to myself, wow, like this is amazing. Or I'll get done with it and I'll be going down on the dock, or we have a pilot boat up in the city that picks us up off the ships on the seaside. And as we're driving away, I'll look at it and think, wow, that's a really big ship. So I do. I sometimes am really in awe of some of the stuff. But when you're there and you're working, the compartmentalization is really important. And you just focus on the thing that you're doing. If you sit around thinking about, oh my gosh, the ship is so big, what am I going to do if this thing goes wrong? You're just so well trained that those things kick in, because you do spend time thinking about what happens next if something doesn't go the way it's supposed to go. But a lot of that is instinctive by now. I really don't spend that much time thinking that I have to climb up 30 feet or that this thing's 1,000 feet long. You would just, I think for myself, I would be paralyzed probably if I really gave it that much thought. I just climb up one rung at a time. I don't like heights. And that's another thing, which is really weird. But I can climb up and down a ladder and it's fine because it's what I do. It's how I get to work. But if I go to other places, if I'm on a balcony or a building or something up high, and I'm like, whoa, that's really high. I don't like that so much.
I want to go back to something you said a moment ago about whether or not the captain of the ship interferes. Does that happen often, or there are a certain set of criteria that have to exist in order for the captain of the ship to interfere with what you're doing?
Some captains are a little nervous. And so if they don't have confidence in you, they're kind of trying to tell you what to do. And when I was younger, I started doing this when I was 31. So I'd walk up on the ship. They were kind of looking over my shoulder to see if my dad was behind me, or so. It was just kind of insulting. So 31-year-old female, they've never seen a woman on a ship before. And it's like, okay, where's the old guy that's supposed to be doing this job today? So they know intellectually that this isn't your first day on a ship, because in any country, being a pilot it's the pinnacle of the profession is to be a pilot. So they know that, but they still don't quite believe it because it's not in their realm of experience. So when I was a lot younger, the captains would try to, I don't want to say push me around, that's too strong, but, oh, the ship's coming in too fast. Oh, the something. And it's like, Captain, I have tugboats and I know what I'm doing. This isn't my first day at work. Or the ship really has to be what they call in extremis for the captain to step in and be justified in stepping in. It's a very tricky position for the captain to be in, because the captain is ultimately responsible for what happens to their ship. But it doesn't relieve the pilot of their responsibility. The pilot is very much responsible. There used to be this sort of misconception that pilots are just advisors. And that's not really true. Pilots are liable for the mistakes that they make. And in fact, there's been a criminalization of pilot incidents, in recent times, 10, 20 years in the past. So pilots do take their responsibility very, very seriously. If a captain interferes or really takes over, they had better have a good reason. It can't just be, oh, I thought you were doing this too fast. But they may not necessarily recognize when that moment is. So, I try to keep the captain informed of my plan. So this is what we're going to do, and this is when we're going to slow down. This is where we get tugs. This is the turning basin. You're going to have this much clearance on each end, so that it isn't scary for them, because some of the maneuvers we do are in very, very tight quarters. and they just don't operate like that in some other places, or they may not have seen that before. So I feel like the more information I can share with the captain as far as what I'm doing, then the more comfortable the captain is. And it sort of cuts that interference thing off before it even starts. But a lot of that, it comes with age and experience and having the confidence to tell the captain, stop, or understanding that if you don't keep what you do as a mystery, just share what you're doing. And then that makes people comfortable. There's something called bridge resource management, and it's this sort of team philosophy that ship's officers train in, so that the junior officers aren't afraid to speak up if they see something that isn't right. So let's say the captain and the pilot are chit-chatting, blah, 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 and the third mate sees that you're going to hit a buoy or a fishing boat or something. It's to give them a voice so that they can speak up instead of saying, oh, you're the third mate, shut up, you don't know anything. Every person that's up there has a lot of value. And so the more participation there is, the more comfortable the junior people are in participating, really the safer the bridge is. It's a little tricky to navigate sometimes, no pun intended. So
it is a little bit of a gray area, I'm sure. But, in the end, you're all on the same team. You're all trying to get that ship in or out of the
exactly.
port safely.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
now I asked you what your most favorite thing is about your profession, but what is the least favorite? I probably can guess, but what is your least favorite thing about being a pilot?
Working during the night and working in bad weather, they're kind of tied. So, but that comes with the job. So we, at least 50% of our traffic moves at night. So that's just part of the job, is learning how to nap and to function on not so much sleep, and making sure you're not spending your off time doing other things other than eating and resting and waiting for your next job. Yeah. And weather, the weather, sometimes bad weather can be very stressful.
I was going to say, I would guess it would have to do with the conditions in general of having to work overnight and in bad weather. So yeah, not hard to guess
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
The size of the ships that enter the port here in Tampa Bay vary greatly. Do you specialize in any particular type of ship, or does it just depend on what's coming and going?
No, every pilot does everything. So from a 150-foot yacht up to 1,100-foot container ship,
Hmm.
every pilot is qualified to do, and we just are in rotation. So there's no specialization there.
So whoever's next up just goes out.
Whoever's next up just goes out.
Now, I think maritime pilots are the unsung heroes of the shipping industry. When I see and read about all these wrecks that I research, and a lot of them come down to just not navigating properly, not knowing the area, not following, really just not following what they should be doing. So getting these, especially these gigantic cargo ships we have now, uh, getting them into and out of ports really is the lifeblood of the global trade. If there's any interference in these processes, well, we saw what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic when that ship got stuck in the Panama Canal, and or not the Panama Canal, it was the Suez Canal.
Suez Canal, yeah.
So anyway, I think pilots are vastly underrated and underappreciated. Not by me, but just in general. Do you agree with that?
Again, it varies. In some places, there's more of a maritime culture than others. I find that here in Florida, there is a great irony there. Florida has a lot of coastline, and there are 9 or 10 pilot associations, and everything that isn't manufactured or grown right where you are is moving around on ships. And a lot of people just don't know that. And that is always surprising to me when I come across people that don't really understand how they're getting all the stuff that they get every day. And it's, the gas that goes in your car, and the bananas and the melons that are coming up from Mexico and Costa Rica, and the furniture you order from Rooms to Go. And just all of this stuff. It's coming in on container ships and tankers and refrigerated cargo ships, and the lumber and the cement and everything you use for construction and building roads, all that stuff comes in by ship. So yeah, I think there is a lack of awareness generally in the whole industry, not just piloting. But even sometimes people know about ships, but they don't know about pilots, and that we're very port specific, and that the risk is enormous. There's a lot of training, and if we make a mistake, you know about it. You make a mistake when you're piloting, that means a ship has gone aground, it's hit a dock, it's hit another ship, there's been some big delay or some damage of some kind. So, I hate to say that we're unsung heroes. I think we're just in a profession that is not, we don't want to be in the public eye. Let me just put it that way. We're not looking for recognition or, great accolades or anything like that. It just, our biggest concern, we just want to move ships safely and not have barriers put in our way, or have people say that, or for people to minimize what we do, because there are people that do that. Well, what are you really doing? You have a laptop computer, my 14-year-old could do that. And it's really insulting. And I do meet people occasionally, and it's always a bit of a shock when they look at me and say, well, that's easy. Don't you just sit around and like drink coffee and look at a computer? And I'm thinking, wow,
that's very insulting.
You should come on. You should come on a ship with me, because you clearly have no idea what we do. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to educate people about what we do, but we're well compensated, and we signed up for it. So I don't think you're going to find pilots complaining because people aren't singing our praises. It is an important job, but there are a lot of important jobs that aren't really visible to everyone. And I personally, I kind of like it that way. If nobody knows my name, that's okay. But then in the context of being a female mariner that could inspire younger women to go into the maritime industry, then I want everyone to know my name, because I think it's important to inspire people that would be such an asset to the industry. So it is, again, that push-pull thing.
I suppose if you wind up in the news, that's probably not for a good thing.
Not usually.
You mentioned, of course, being a female pilot, some of the challenges you've faced with that. I believe you're one of only 2 female pilots in Florida. There are not many overall in the United States, but clearly your experience and your accolades speak for themselves. But how would you describe overall the position you're in such a male-dominated profession?
First and foremost, I didn't enter the profession to be any kind of trailblazer or set an example or inspire people. I wanted to be in the profession because I wanted to be on ships. And it really never occurred to me that I couldn't. So that's what I did. And then naively, I suppose, I was always a little surprised at the reaction of the vast majority of men. So at the Merchant Marine Academy, it was about 10% women. When I went to sea, I was usually the only female on the ship, with maybe 22 people on the whole ship. So that just sort of became normal for me. And it took a few years for that glass ceiling to really become a problem or an opportunity for change. I don't like to call things problems, but if I hadn't run into that as a ship's officer, I never would have become a pilot. So, there are challenges, and you deal with them. So you stand your ground, you try to do a better job than everyone else around you, and just try to, insist on being evaluated for your performance and for what you bring to the table, rather than for someone's perception of why women can't do this or women can't do that. That stuff just doesn't fly. And when you work on a ship, there's so few people and so much work to do that male or female, everyone has to do their part plus a little more. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So once you're working with people, they get that. But it does get a little tiresome having to prove that over and over. But as a pilot, you're very high in the profession. So there's not an assumption of special treatment or that it was easier for you to become a pilot. Piloting is a hard profession, whether you're a man or a woman. It is stressful and it is technically challenging, and there's just a lot to deal with all the time. And so I think for all pilots, not just women, it's a challenging profession to be in. Then there are subtleties to that as well. Being, the only woman in my association, there have been men that were insensitive to things that happened to me and them equally, but for some reason it's minimized when it happens to me, and without just getting too personal about that. Again, you have to be a good partner and do make the best decisions that are for your organization and be excellent at your job. And that's how you gain the respect of people. And that's how you pave the way for the people that come after you. But it's a lot of work. And sometimes you get worn down because, you're always explaining something, and sometimes you just want to go and do your job and not have someone say, oh, I've never had a female pilot before. It's like, okay, how do I even respond to that anymore? I'm like, I used to try and think of some little snippy answers and whatnot. And now I just kind of ignore it, but I'm older now, you can see the gray hair. And, so I get on the ship and they know it's not my first day.
Not older, experienced.
Experienced. Yeah.
And to that person that said, I've never had a female pilot before, you could say, well, have you had a pilot before? Because that's what I am.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'll do that next time.
Well, I hope that overall it's gotten better over the years rather than worse. But certainly what you've gone through and the challenges you faced are appreciated by all the young aspiring pilots out there. Do you have any advice for anyone looking to get into the profession?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things you can do if you set your sights on piloting is to make contact with a pilot and develop a relationship so that you have a mentor, male or female, it doesn't matter. There were very few female role models for me when I was coming up, and my mentor was a man. And to this day, he still gives me advice and guidance and encouragement. So those relationships can look a lot of different ways. But there are a lot more women in high positions now. So for a young woman looking to become a pilot, I would say get in touch with a woman pilot and just develop that relationship. There's a wonderful organization called Women Offshore, and they have a big social media presence. And that is a fantastic place to start. They have a mentorship program where you get matched based on your professional and personal characteristics, goals, whatnot. And I've been involved in that program for several years and have had some wonderful mentees from, student to recent graduate, to someone that's been in the profession that wants to be a pilot now. So, and they're great. You learn a lot. Even if you're the mentor, you learn from your mentee all the time. And it's kind of that same thing. All ships are the same and all ships are different. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So the maritime industry it's still very slow to change, and women are still feeling like they're singled out in lots of ways, but there has been a lot of progress. So the numbers of women in maritime are growing, not super fast, but there are more now than there were then. And there are more pathways to the higher positions now. But I would tell any young person, any young woman in particular, women offshores, that's where you want to start, because they have tremendous resources. And, if you're on a ship going in and out of a port and you happen to have a female pilot, don't be afraid to say hello and say, can I ask you a few questions after the job's over? Usually I try to initiate that. If there's a woman officer on the bridge, I'll ask them if they've ever considered becoming a pilot, and, just to let me know if they're interested or need help. So, I do, there are lots of women all over the place that, and I know all the women that are captains and pilots, we all do this. We just try to encourage people and help them through any of the challenging times they may be having on the ship, or try to direct them, someplace. But there are a lot of resources out there now that didn't exist when I started in the profession in the 80s. Wow, that sounds like a long time ago, doesn't it? The 80s.
You were also appointed and presently serving on the National Navigation Safety Advisory Committee. What are the responsibilities of that committee?
So that's what's known as a Federal Advisory Committee, or a FACA. And it is an advisory committee to the Coast Guard, to the Commandant of the Coast Guard. So when the Coast Guard's looking at making or changing policy or doing anything that affects the navigation rules of the road, they seek advice from users of the waterway. So the committee is made up of 20 or so members that range from pilots, captains, people that work at shipping offices, passenger vessel association, sailing vessel people, the whole spectrum of people that use the waterway. And we gather together usually twice a year, and we're given tasks, and it's to evaluate and craft resolutions which act as advice to the Coast Guard for implementing policy and making changes. So sometimes, a bunch of Coast Guard people sitting around a room, they come up with something, think it's a great idea, and they really haven't considered how that affects everybody else, so that everybody else is on that committee.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Just a simple thing to share is, don't take no for an answer. If there's something you want to do in your life, whether it's piloting or going to sea or becoming a chef or an astronaut or a surgeon, whatever it is you want to do in your life, just go do it, and don't let people tell you that you can't do it because you are this or you are that. That's up to you. That's their baggage. That's not your baggage, right? I don't think it's women or other people should adjust. When you're the minority in a group, people always think that you have to adjust to fit in, but you're a qualified, skilled, intelligent, value-added person to whatever the organization is. And it's their issues with you. It's not your issues with them. And so if there's something you want to do, just go after it and find someone that's in the profession that can help you and guide you and be like a reality check if you are perceiving something that's pretty useful. Sometimes you feel put upon and you think it's because you're this thing, and it's not. It could just be because you didn't do that right. So you have to be able to kind of separate those issues. I am on Instagram. It is a private, but if I get requests, if I recognize it as someone that's maritime related or, not trying to sell me something, I always allow access. So on Instagram, I'm just Pilot Mom and then the number 52. So anyone that is interested in communicating or watching the time-lapse videos or the pictures of sunrises over the Skyway Bridge, I welcome that.
Or a young aspiring pilot reaching out for a mentor?
Yeah, and I do. I get messages on my Instagram. It's kind of nice. And actually, this kind of neat thing happened, and it was all through Instagram. I hate to plug a social media outlet because they're just so enormous and they're listening to you while you're talking on your phone. But I met a woman in Australia through Instagram, and she set me up with a long distance mentorship for the first female pilot in Sydney, in Botany Bay. And this was several years ago. And so that was the first mentor relationship I had with another female mariner. And it didn't matter that she was halfway around the world. We talked about all the same things I would talk about with a pilot that's in my own port. And that network of women pilots around the world has really grown. And there are, I think, 60 of us now
Oh,
on a
wow.
WhatsApp chat. So if there are any female pilots that listen to this podcast, they need to reach out because, we're trying to link everybody together, and that conversation is just continuing to grow. And that all happened through social media. So that was such a positive thing when you think of also the negative things and the rabbit holes that people go down. But it's really been incredible in connecting us.
That's really
So
great. 60 people all on a WhatsApp chat.
yeah, and different people chime in at different times. We're all in different time zones. So, we have pilot in India and Australia, Sweden, the UK, from Alaska to Florida. So really it's hard to even get 5 or 6 people that are awake or not working at the same time, but people post their pictures from work. And then sometimes we have some pretty serious chats about safety things or some of the issues female pilots have as far as, having kids and dealing with resistance from their group to better their safety culture. The women seem to be a little more safety conscious just generally. So there are some pretty serious professional issues that we discuss in the group. And then we also have fun. There's birthday wishes and pictures and silly things. And we try to do Zoom meetups twice a month, and whoever just is awake and available. And that's always been pretty interesting too. But yeah, social media for good.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great
Yeah.
that you do that.
Maritime school is a very interesting experience. There are other parts to the maritime industry than just working on ships and becoming pilots. It's a fascinating industry. So, if you're in high school and you're not sure what you want to do, look at a maritime school as a possibility just to open your eyes and expand, your view of the world, because ships and the water really connect all of us. It's quite amazing.
Well, Captain Carolyn Kurtz, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much to Captain Carolyn Kurtz for joining me today. I really appreciate it. For any young women out there who are interested in becoming a maritime pilot, please go to womenoffshore.org, as Carolyn mentioned in the episode, and you'll find all kinds of resources there for you. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Secret, and you can follow him at Sean Secret on YouTube or on the web at sean.siegfried.se. You can follow Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on social media at ShipwrecksPod and also at shipwrecksandseadogs.com. Last but not least, I would really appreciate it if all of you out there could leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, goodpods.com, or podchaser.com. And tell a friend. The show is growing, and I'd love to see it grow even more. Until next time, don't forget to wear your life jackets.